The Ashfall mountain range stretched far across the horizon, jagged peaks rising high into the sky like the claws of an ancient beast. These mountains were home to the Dragon Pack, an ancient family of dragons that had ruled the skies for centuries. Their scales shimmered in the sunlight, ranging from fiery red to deep midnight black, and their wings beat with the power of storms. They were creatures of legend, feared by all who crossed their path. The pack lived in peace, their lives governed by the will of their alpha, Vornoth. He was a mighty dragon, with scales that gleamed like molten lava and eyes that burned with the wisdom of ages. His pack was his family, and the safety of his young was his highest priority. The hatchlings, the future of the pack, were small but strong, their wings barely visible beneath their scales. They lived deep within the heart of the mountains, safe from any harm, protected by the fierce warriors of the pack. But one day, everything changed. The wind howled through the mountains as a strange storm gathered on the horizon. It was not like any storm the dragons had seen before. Dark clouds twisted and churned as if they were alive, and the air crackled with a strange energy. The hatchlings, who had been playing in the caves, suddenly vanished without a trace. Vornoth's heart sank as he realized what had happened. His hatchlings were gone. For days the pack searched the mountains, their wings cutting through the skies like knives. They scoured every cave, every crack, every corner of the vast range, but there was no sign of the hatchlings. It was as though they had simply disappeared, swallowed up by the very earth itself. Vornoth was a creature of great power, and he could feel the disturbance in the air. This was no ordinary disappearance. Someone had taken his hatchlings, but who and why? The days turned into weeks, and the once peaceful mountains became filled with an air of unease. The other dragons grew restless, their instincts telling them that something was wrong. But even with all their might, they could not find the hatchlings. The mountains, once their home, now seemed foreign and dangerous. Vornoth had no choice but to seek out the one creature he never thought he would turn to for help: humans. The humans lived on the edges of the mountains, in small villages scattered across the land. They were weak, fragile creatures with no wings to soar through the skies or claws to fight with. The dragons had always looked down on them, considering them insignificant in comparison. But now Vornoth had no choice. If there was a chance that a human could help him find his young, he would take it. The Alpha called for a council of the pack. The great dragons gathered in the heart of the mountains, their voices echoing through the caves as they discussed their options. The humans were not to be trusted, they said. They were treacherous, selfish, and weak. But Vornoth's mind was made up. He would find the hatchlings, no matter the cost, and so, with heavy hearts and a sense of dread in the air, the pack set off toward the human settlements. The sun was beginning to set when Vornoth and his warriors reached the edge of the forest. The humans lived in small cottages made of wood, surrounded by fields of crops and animals. The scent of smoke from cooking fires filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed from the village. Vornoth landed quietly in the clearing, his wings folding against his massive body. He was a shadow against the darkening sky, his eyes scanning the village for any sign of the hatchlings. His warriors were scattered across the area, searching for any clues. They crept through the trees, their eyes sharp and their senses heightened. Vornoth stayed in the clearing, his gaze fixed on the village, his mind racing with questions. Had the humans taken his hatchlings? And if so, why? As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard a sound, a faint rustle in the bushes. His sharp eyes turned toward the noise, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure. It was a human, but unlike any he had seen before. The man was tall, with dark hair and a rugged appearance. His eyes were not filled with fear, but with determination. In his arms he held something, two small, glowing forms. Vornoth's heart skipped a beat. The hatchlings. The human stood still for a moment, as if he knew the dragons were watching him. Then slowly he stepped forward, carrying the hatchlings carefully in his arms. They chirped softly, their small wings fluttering slightly. "These are mine to protect," the human said, his voice calm but firm. "I will not let you harm them." Vornoth's wings twitched in surprise. The human spoke with authority, as though he had every right to protect the hatchlings. But how could that be? They were dragons, born of fire and ancient magic, not some human creature's responsibility. The pack stirred behind him, but Vornoth raised a clawed hand to silence them. He was still processing what he was seeing. This human was not like the others. There was something different about him. The human stepped closer, the hatchling safe in his arms. "They chose me," he continued. "I found them. They are not yours to command anymore." Vornoth's eyes narrowed. "You speak of things you do not understand, human. The hatchlings belong to the dragon pack. They are of our blood, our kin." The human shook his head, his grip tightening on the hatchlings. "They may be of your blood, but they are not yours to own." "They are free." The pack tensed, ready to spring into action. But Vornoth held his ground. Something about the human's words resonated within him. He had never heard a human speak like this before, and yet he felt no malice in the man's voice. He felt no fear. A new wave of doubt washed over Vornoth, and he realized that perhaps the hatchlings had not been taken in the way he had first thought. Perhaps this human was not the enemy. Perhaps, just perhaps, the dragons had forgotten what it meant to protect. Kyle never thought his life would lead him to a moment like this. A simple farmer living on the edges of the Ashfall Mountains, he had only known peace, solitude, and the quiet rhythm of daily chores. But that all changed the day the hatchlings appeared at his door. He had first noticed them at dawn. A strange, distant sound had woken him, like the gentle chirp of birds, but deeper, more resonant. His curiosity led him outside, where he found them, two small, shimmering creatures huddled beneath the shelter of his front porch. At first, Kyle had no idea what they were. Their scales glistened like jewels in the morning sun, and their eyes, large and glowing with intelligence, stared up at him in quiet wonder. They were like nothing he had ever seen before. His heart raced with uncertainty. He knew the stories, the legends told by the old folk in the village, stories of the dragons that lived deep in the mountains, creatures of unimaginable power, and of the great war that had once nearly destroyed everything. Dragons were not to be trusted. They were creatures of destruction, their wings capable of tearing entire forests apart, their flames hot enough to scorch the earth. But these were not like the fearsome beasts of the legends. These were young, fragile, and vulnerable. Kyle had no idea why they had come to him, or what they wanted, but in his heart, he knew one thing. He couldn't leave them to fend for themselves. For days, Kyle kept the hatchlings hidden. He fed them, built a small shelter in his barn, and watched over them carefully. He began to notice their strange behavior. They responded to his voice, their eyes following him with an almost unnatural awareness. They chirped when he approached, as if eager to communicate. But their language was unlike any Kale had ever heard. It was a mix of sounds like soft hums and clicks that seemed to stir something deep within him. Then one night, as Kale sat by the fire, a strange feeling washed over him. It was as if the air itself was vibrating with energy. He felt a pull, a deep instinctive connection to the hatchlings. Without knowing why, he reached out to them, his hands hovering above their fragile bodies. The moment his fingers brushed against their scales, a surge of warmth flooded his chest. His mind cleared, and for a brief moment, he understood them, understood their purpose, their ancient bond to the dragons, and the power they carried within them. In that instant, Kale knew that they were not just ordinary creatures. They were part of something much greater, something that transcended the boundaries between humans and dragons. The hatchlings were connected to the very heart of the dragon's ancient legacy. They had chosen him, not as their master, but as their protector. It was a connection that neither he nor the dragons could ignore. The morning the dragons arrived, Kale knew his peaceful life was about to shatter. He had been tending to the fields when he first noticed the shadows, large winged creatures that blotted out the sun as they soared overhead. His heart skipped a beat. He knew immediately who they were, the dragons. Their presence was undeniable, their power radiating like a force of nature itself. As they descended, the ground trembled beneath his feet. The dragons landed in a clearing near his home, their massive forms causing the earth to crack and shift. Kale stood still, his breath caught in his throat. There was no mistaking the leader, the massive, fearsome creature with molten red scales and eyes that burned with ancient fire. It was the Alpha, Vornoth, the leader of the dragon pack. The other dragons gathered around, their eyes scanning the land, searching for the hatchlings. Kale's heart raced as he saw the pack's warriors approach, their claws digging into the earth as they moved closer. He knew they were there for the hatchlings. They had come to claim them, and he was the one standing in their way. For a moment, Kale considered running. But deep down he knew he couldn't abandon the creatures that had entrusted their safety to him. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and spoke with a calmness he didn't feel. "The hatchlings are under my protection," Kyle said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "They are not yours to take." The dragons stopped in their tracks, their eyes narrowing as they fixed on him. There was a long silence, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees. Vornoth the Alpha stared at Kale, his gaze filled with an ancient power. "You are a human," Vornoth growled. "What right do you have to claim our young as your own?" Kale held his ground, his hands still at his sides, never straying far from the hatchlings. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, could sense the energy building in the air as the dragons circled around him, but he had made a promise to protect them, and he would not back down now. "They chose me," Kale said, his voice unwavering. "I did not take them. They came to me. They are not tools of war or symbols of power. They are living beings, and they are free." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The dragons growled low in their throats, their wings fluttering, and Kale braced himself for what would come next. Vornoth's massive form stepped forward, his great claws scraping against the ground as he approached Kale. The air seemed to grow thicker, charged with the tension between them. For a moment it seemed as if a battle was inevitable, but then something unexpected happened. Vornoth stopped. His piercing gaze never left Kyle, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a recognition, a sense of understanding. "What is this?" Vornoth muttered, his voice almost softer than before. "How can a human feel this bond?" Kale's heart skipped a beat as he realized the truth. The bond he shared with the hatchlings was not just his own. It was something ancient, something that even Vornoth, the Alpha, could not deny. The dragons had forgotten the deeper connections that tied them to the world, to the creatures they once shared it with. They had grown too proud, too consumed by their power, but Kale, he was different. He was the bridge between the past and the future, a human who could feel the pulse of the ancient world within him. Vornoth stepped back slightly, his eyes still fixed on Kale. "You protect them as if they were your own," he said, his voice now filled with something akin to respect. "Perhaps there is more to you than we first thought." Kale nodded, his chest swelling with a mixture of relief and pride. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just a human farmer. He was a protector, a guardian of life, and perhaps the key to healing the rift between humans and dragons. And as he looked at the hatchlings in his arms, Kale knew that this was only the beginning of something far greater. The mountains trembled under the weight of the dragon pack as they circled the clearing, their massive wings flapping like thunderclaps in the sky. The air was thick with tension, and every dragon's gaze was fixed on Kyle, the human who stood between them and the hatchlings they had come to claim. Vornoth, the Alpha, hovered above the ground, his great wings casting long shadows across the earth. His fiery red scales gleamed in the fading sunlight, and his eyes glowed with the intensity of ancient fury. The power radiating from him was enough to make the earth shake, yet Kale stood tall before him, the hatchling still cradled in his arms. His heart raced, but his expression remained calm. He had made a choice, to protect these creatures, and he would not back down. "You are a human," Vornoth's voice boomed, echoing across the mountains. "You have no right to stand in our way. The hatchlings are ours to claim. Return them or face the consequences." The words sent a shiver down Kale's spine, but he didn't flinch. He could feel the weight of the dragon's stares, their predatory gazes searching for any sign of weakness. But Kale knew that if he showed fear now, it would all be over. He could not let them take the hatchlings, not after everything they had been through together. "They are not yours to claim," Kale replied, his voice firm, but not without a trace of respect. "They chose me, and I have given them my protection. I will not let you take them." Vornoth's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was a dangerous silence. The dragon's wings stirred, the beating of their wings echoing through the mountains. Kale could see the anger in their eyes, the centuries-old pride that they carried with them. But something was different now. Something had shifted. Vornoth let out a low growl. "You are foolish, human. You cannot possibly understand what you are dealing with. The dragon's blood runs deep. You cannot stand against us." Kyle stepped forward, his feet firm against the ground. The hatchlings in his arms shifted, their tiny forms growing heavier with each passing second. He felt a strange surge of energy as they pressed closer to him, a bond deeper than he could explain. The connection between him and the hatchlings was more than just one of protection. It was something ancient, something that even Vornoth could not deny. "I don't need to understand everything," Kale said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I only need to understand what's right. These hatchlings are not pawns in your game. They are living beings, and they are free." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The dragon's eyes flickered, and for the briefest of moments Kale saw something that startled him. Doubt. A hesitation in Vornoth's gaze. A flicker of recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, this human was more than he appeared to be. But the moment passed, and the Alpha's prideful roar broke the silence. "Enough of this. You stand in the way of the Pack's legacy. We will take what is ours by right." The dragons began to move, their massive forms surrounding Kale in a ring of pure power. Their claws dug into the earth as they prepared to strike, their breath growing hot and thick with the scent of fire. Kale's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But then he felt the bond once more, the deep connection with the hatchlings. They were his responsibility now, and he would not fail them. Kale's hand moved instinctively to the pouch at his side, where he kept the small dagger he had used to defend himself from the wild beasts that roamed the mountains. It was a poor weapon, but it was all he had. His fingers brushed the hilt, and as he gripped it, the world seemed to slow down. In that moment, Kale felt something deep within him stir. It was not just the bond with the hatchlings, but something older, something primal. The energy around him shifted, and he realized that he was not alone in this battle. The ancient power that connected humans and dragons surged through him, filling him with a strength he had never known. His heart surged with a quiet confidence, and for the first time he understood what he had to do. He could not fight the dragons with violence, but he could fight with what they had long forgotten: honor, understanding, and unity. "Vornoth," Kale called out, his voice stronger now. "I don't want to fight. I only want to protect what's mine as you protect what's yours. But I will not back down." The Alpha's eyes flashed with anger and his wings flared. "Then you will die as a fool, human." With a mighty roar, Vornoth lunged toward Kale, his jaws open wide, flames licking at the edges of his teeth. Kale's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. The hatchlings stirred in his arms, their tiny forms glowing with an inner light. It was then that Kale realized the hatchlings weren't just passive creatures. They were a part of him now, and they would fight with him. Suddenly, the ground beneath them seemed to rumble. A blinding light shot up from the hatchlings, and Kale felt the pulse of ancient magic flood through him. The dragons hesitated, their eyes wide in disbelief. The air around Kale crackled with power, and a force stronger than anything Kale could have imagined surged from the depths of the earth. The hatchlings chirped, their voices ringing in Kale's mind like the call of a long-lost song. Their wings fluttered, and Kale felt the power that flowed through them, an ancient magic that had been dormant for centuries. The dragons had forgotten this power, but it had never truly left. Vornoth paused mid-air, his massive form frozen in place as the power radiated from Kale and the hatchlings. The Alpha's gaze flickered with uncertainty, his wings flapping nervously as he struggled to understand what was happening. "No," Vornoth muttered, his voice strained. "This cannot be." "What are you?" Kale stood firm, the power surging through him, and his voice rang out with newfound authority. "I am the bridge between our worlds, Vornoth. I am the guardian of the future, and I will not let the past destroy it." The dragons, stunned by the power they had long forgotten, hesitated. Vornoth's eyes flickered, filled with a mix of fear and awe. For the first time, he saw Kale not as an enemy, but as something greater, someone who had the power to change everything. For a moment, silence fell between them. Then Vornoth spoke, his voice softer than it had ever been before. "You have power, human, more than any of us anticipated." Kyle's heart pounded in his chest, but his grip on the hatchlings remained steady. The battle was not over, but something had changed. The first steps toward peace had been taken, and as the light dimmed and the dragons lowered their wings, Kale knew that this was just the beginning. The mountains were silent, save for the soft rustling of wind through the trees. Kale stood in the center of the clearing, his body still tingling with the ancient energy that had flowed through him and the hatchlings. The dragons had not moved, their eyes still wide with disbelief. The power that had come from Kale had shaken them to their core, a force they had not felt in centuries. Vornoth, the mighty Alpha, hovered in the air above him, his wings beating slowly as if unsure of what to do next. His fiery eyes searched Kale's face, trying to understand the man who had somehow gained the power of the dragons themselves. Kale stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that he had done something extraordinary, but the path ahead was still unclear. Would the dragons accept him? Or would they see him as a threat and strike down the human who had dared to defy them? Kale's heart pounded as he faced Vornoth. He knew that the dragons would not forget this. They could not simply walk away. The bond between dragons and humans had been severed long ago, and Kale's presence, his power, threatened to reopen wounds that the dragons had long kept hidden. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hatchlings in Kale's arms shifted restlessly, their small wings fluttering with a nervous energy that matched Kale's own. He could feel the pulse of the ancient magic flowing through them, and with it, a sense of connection to the world that was older than anything he had known. Then, Vornoth spoke. "You have changed everything," the Alpha said, his voice low and gravelly. "We had forgotten the bond we once shared, forgotten the magic that flows through our veins. But you have awakened something in us." Kyle swallowed, unsure of what to say. The weight of Vornoth's words settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had never imagined that his actions would have such an impact. He had only wanted to protect the hatchlings, and yet here he was, standing in the heart of the mountains, facing the most powerful creatures in the world. "I didn't ask for this," Kyle said quietly, his voice steady but filled with a trace of sorrow. "I didn't ask to become your bridge, Vornoth. I only wanted to protect them. They are innocent. They deserve to be free." The Alpha's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. The other dragons, who had once been ready to tear Kale apart, now hovered in the distance, watching him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. They could sense the change in the air, the presence of something new and powerful. They did not know what to make of it, but they could not ignore it. Vornoth landed gracefully in front of Kale, his great claws digging into the earth as he crouched low. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the Alpha's form, and the air seemed to hum with the power that radiated from him. "We were once protectors, just as you are now," Vornoth said, his voice softer than before. "But somewhere along the way we lost our way. We became creatures of dominance ruled by pride and fear. We forgot what it meant to protect." Kale nodded, understanding the truth of Vornoth's words. The dragons were not the monsters that legends made them out to be. They were not mindless creatures driven by bloodlust. They had been protectors once, but over time they had lost sight of that purpose. Kale could see it now in the way they hesitated, in the way their eyes shifted between him and the hatchlings. They were not enemies. They were lost. "Maybe it's time for both of us to remember," Kale said quietly, looking up at Vornoth. "Maybe it's time to stop fighting, to heal what's broken." Vornoth let out a heavy sigh, his wings folding against his back. "I do not know if we can heal everything, Humyn. The rift between our kinds is too deep. Too many have died because of the war. Too much has been lost." Kyle's gaze softened. "But we can try. We can try to build something new. The past doesn't have to define us." The Alpha's eyes met his, and for the first time, Kale saw something else in them. Hope. It was fleeting, barely a spark, but it was there. The dragons had been through so much. They had seen centuries of conflict and loss. But perhaps, just perhaps, Kale had given them a reason to believe again. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant calls of other dragons soaring high above. Kyle could feel the weight of the moment settling in his chest. He had not only saved the hatchlings, he had awakened something much larger, a change that could heal the wounds between humans and dragons. He had become the catalyst for a new era, one where both species could live together, not as enemies, but as allies. Suddenly, the hatchlings in Kale's arms chirped loudly, drawing Vornoth's attention. The tiny creatures had grown more restless, their wings fluttering excitedly. Kale looked down at them, and for the first time he saw what they were truly capable of. Their small bodies pulsed with an energy that was not just their own. It was the energy of the dragons, the same energy that had once bound dragons and humans together. Vornoth's gaze softened as he looked at the hatchlings. He stepped forward, his great form towering over Kale, but his eyes were filled with something new, curiosity, wonder, and something deeper, a longing for the past that he had long forgotten. "They are the future," Vornoth said softly, almost to himself. "The first light has returned, and with it a chance to heal what we have broken." Kyle looked up at the Alpha, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and resolve. "We can be more than we were," he said. "Together we can rebuild what's been lost. It's not too late." For a long moment there was silence. Then Vornoth's voice broke through the stillness. "We will not fight you, Humyn," the Alpha said. "But we cannot go back. We must move forward. The hatchlings will choose their path and we will help guide them. But they will not be ours to control. We have learned that much." Kyle felt a wave of relief wash over him. The dragons were not going to take the hatchlings. They were not going to force them to live as they had lived. Instead, they were offering something far greater, a chance for freedom, for peace. The wind shifted, and the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the mountains. It was as if the world itself had heard their words. For the first time, the sky seemed clear, the air fresh as if a new era was beginning. Kale looked down at the hatchlings in his arms, their tiny wings fluttering with excitement. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, he felt that it was a future worth fighting for. And as the light of the first dawn rose over the mountains, Kale knew one thing for certain: the dragons and humans would not remain enemies forever. Together, they would find a way to build a new world, a world where both species could live side by side, no longer bound by fear or pride, but by the shared understanding that they were more alike than they had ever known. The sky above the Ashfall Mountains was painted in hues of orange and gold as the first light of dawn spread across the land. The once cold, jagged peaks now glowed warmly in the morning sun, a sign of the changes to come. The wind, which had once carried only the scent of smoke and ash, now carried a promise: hope. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, the hatchlings nestled gently in his arms. Their tiny bodies vibrated with excitement, their scales shimmering like fragments of the sky itself. The bond he shared with them had deepened since that first moment he had protected them. They were not just creatures he had found and cared for. They had become part of him, and in return he had become part of them. They shared his thoughts, his feelings, and in a strange way, his heart. Around him the dragons of the pack moved slowly, each of them looking toward the horizon as though waiting for something. Vornoth, the Alpha, stood a little apart from the others, his massive form casting a long shadow as the sun rose behind him. There was no anger in his eyes now, no hunger for dominance. There was only something quieter, something that had been missing for so long. A sense of peace. "You were right," Vornoth said, his deep voice rumbling through the air. "We cannot change the past, but we can change the future." Kale looked up at the mighty dragon, feeling the weight of those words. They were more than just an acceptance, they were a beginning. The future was a long road, and both humans and dragons would need to walk it together. There was no turning back now, no going back to the way things had been before. They had to move forward no matter how difficult or uncertain that path might be. "I never wanted to change anything about the dragons," Kale said softly. "I just wanted to protect them." "Protect all of us," Vornoth nodded, his sharp gaze now softened with understanding. "And that is what matters most. You have brought us a gift, Humyn. A gift of unity, something we thought lost to us forever." The bond between dragons and humans was once strong, long before the war and the pain, and now through you, it can be strong again. Kale felt the weight of Vornoth's words deep in his chest. The bond between humans and dragons had always been more than just a tale. It had been a truth, buried beneath centuries of conflict and pride. Now, as the dragons gathered around him, Kale knew that this was the beginning of something new. The beginning of an era where both species could stand together, side by side as protectors of the world they shared. The other dragons, once filled with distrust and anger, now watched him with respect and maybe even a little awe. The connection he shared with the hatchlings was not just one of love, it was one of power, of ancient magic that both species had forgotten, but was now awakening again. Kyle could feel it in the way the wind shifted, in the way the earth seemed to hum beneath his feet. It was as if the world itself was responding to the changes they had set into motion. One of the younger dragons, a female with gleaming silver scales, stepped forward hesitantly. Her wings fluttered nervously, and for a moment Kale could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "You truly believe this is possible?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with wonder. "That we can work together? That we, the dragons, and you, the humans, can coexist?" Kale smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "Yes," he said firmly. "I do believe it's possible, but only if we both choose to try. The dragon blinked in surprise, and then she nodded slowly as if considering his words. "Then I will try," she said, a quiet resolve in her voice. "For the hatchlings, and for the future." Kale looked down at the hatchlings in his arms. Their eyes, bright and full of curiosity, were locked onto the dragons around them. It was clear that they felt the same sense of hope, the same sense of wonder at the possibility of something new. The moment stretched, the silence heavy with meaning. The first light of dawn spread across the mountains, bathing the clearing in a soft glow. Kale could feel the warmth of the sun on his face, and for the first time, it felt like a new beginning, not just for him, but for all of them. Vornoth turned his gaze toward the horizon, his sharp eyes narrowing as he surveyed the land. "There is much work to be done," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But we will begin here. We will begin with the hatchlings and with the hope you've brought us." Kyle nodded. The work ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, old prejudices, new dangers, and the weight of years of history to overcome. But there was also something stronger than any of that: the bond they had forged. A bond of understanding, of respect, and of a shared desire to protect the world they all called home. "I'll do whatever it takes," Kale said, his voice steady with resolve. "For them, for you, for the future." Vornoth let out a low growl, but it was a sound of agreement, not anger. "We will stand together," he said, "and together we will restore the balance." As the sun continued to rise, casting a golden light across the land, Kale knew that this was only the beginning. There was much work to be done. The world had changed, and it would continue to change, but for the first time in a long while, Kyle felt the weight of the world was something he could carry. The dragons would not be his enemies. They would not be his masters, and he would not be their servant. They were equals, bound together by a shared purpose, a shared future. It was a new dawn, and with it a new chance to rebuild what had been broken. The hatchlings chirped excitedly, their small wings fluttering as they looked up at Kale. In their eyes, he saw something that made his heart swell with pride. A future filled with hope, promise, and unity. As the first rays of sunlight bathed the mountains, Kale stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The world was changing, and this time it was changing for the better.